Hi everyone, welcome to another table talk. So today I wanted to go over in pretty good detail a lot of the lessons learned, tips, techniques that I've used now in building high performance durable park jets out of primarily Dollar Tree foam, Adams readi-board for almost a year and a half now. So I know there are hundreds and thousands of people that build RC planes out of Dollar Tree foam. And I certainly kind of got into it late in the game. But these are things that I've used, that I've learned from other people, and just, by my own trial and error. So anyway, first off, I want to give out a shout to my countryman Peter, Homie666 on the RC Powers forum. He was instrumental in helping me get going. Of course, Flight Test, they pretty much built their empire on RC planes out of Dollar Tree foam. I learned a lot from their videos and all of the dozens and hundreds of people that posted very good videos on YouTube. So anyway, so this plane, if you've watched any of my flying videos, this is a pretty high performance plane, fast and can take a lot of punishment aerobatically, yanking and banking. Right now it has about 320 flights on it, I think, so it is starting to show its age. It's a little nicked up. But I think it's proof that with a little patience and a little time, you can build a pretty high performance and durable park jet, primarily with Dollar Tree foam. Now I have built one airplane. The first airplane I built entirely out of Dollar Tree foam, and I'll talk a little bit about some lessons learned there. If you go into the video description down below, I'll have a list of blog posts that I wrote early on. The lessons that I learned early on when I was first building with Dollar Tree foam. Primarily the reasons that I use it, it's very inexpensive, cost me about $1.25 Canadian a sheet, which is actually less than $1 American now. I have a Dollar Tree store about 25 minutes drive from my house, so I can go and get it. I don't have to have it shipped to me. The other thing I like about it is that, with the paper on, it's about 5 millimeters thick. With the paper off, it's about 4.5 millimeters thick. So when I'm looking to have a plane that's really nice and sleek compared to building with Depron or model plane foam, I'm getting that little bit of extra thinner surfaces, which is proven to work out really, really well. So there's the main reasons. I live in Canada, and RC Foam, where I used to get all of my Depron from, they're essentially going to be out of business by the end of 2018. I'm looking also, this plane is built with primarily model plane foam and also some Depron. So by using a lot of Dollar Tree foam, sorry, what did I say? Yeah, this is Dollar Tree foam and Depron. So by using, a lot of Dollar Tree foam, I can stretch my supply of Depron and model plane foam for many, many years to come. So anyway, so that's that. All right, so what is Dollar Tree foam? Well, Dollar Tree foam is made by Adams readi-board. Hopefully you can see the label up here, made in the U.S. So it comes in 20 by 30 inch sheets at my Dollar Tree store. I can buy it in white, which is what I build with primarily, especially for my wing plates and stuff like that, because white is much easier to paint over. But I also have a few sheets of black, based on a tip from Peter. The black, if I'm building parts like KFs, fuselages, that sort of stuff, and I know I'm going to be taking all of the paper off, it's much easier to peel the paper off of this black. I don't know why. The foam is exactly the same underneath, but getting the paper off is much easier. So some things, obviously most park jet plans, that you buy have been designed for Depron, 700 millimeter by 1 meter or 27 inch by 39 inch sheets, or maybe larger, or model plane foam, which comes in 24 by 48 sheets. So you do have to get a little bit creative, when you're using this to lay your pieces out, so you don't waste a whole lot of foam. Most of the planes that I build have about a 28 inch or less wingspan. So I tend to try and lay it out so that my wing is, you know, lengthwise here. So if I have to cut, when I cut the plans out, if I have to cut bits and pieces off either the front or the back of the wing plate so that I can have my wing in one piece. That's just a technique that I like to use. So it takes a little bit of you know, planning and figuring there. It's a little bit different. I use, this is the type of knife here that I use for most of my, you know, Depron and model plane foam. You know, you get these blades. They've got, so it's essentially two blades in one. I really like this because it's nice and strong and heavy. What I found, and I don't know if the blade is, you know, I don't have any way of measuring it that thin, the blade feels a little bit thicker and heavier. So when I first started cutting it, I felt like I was crushing the foam before I got through the paper, even with a brand new sharp blade. So what I use is I like to use this, this body is just an old body, you know, that I got from Hobby King. This is very similar to like Olfa knives or higher quality. It has the blade with, you know, you can snap off pieces at a time as they get dull. So this blade feels a little thinner when I'm cutting. The other thing, I like to put my plans down on top of the foam with the paper still left on. That way I don't leave any glue residue on the foam when I pull the plans off. So essentially I'm cutting through three layers of paper plus the foam. So the knife gets quite a bit dull, or gets dull quite a bit faster than Depron or model plane foam. So I found that this one works really, really well. And then I can just snap off as I need to. And this foam will really tell you if as your knife starts to get dull, because you'll start to actually sort of tear the paper a little bit and tear the foam. So that knife works well for me. For really fine cutting, I also use, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, I also use you know, the good old number 11 X-Acto blade knife as well. Okay, so all right, so you know, there's always a discussion: do I leave the paper on? Do I take the paper off? You know, this is a piece with the paper on. It's actually you know, it's actually pretty stiff with the paper on. The downside is the paper does add a considerable amount of weight. So what I've found is I take the paper off, essentially everything forward of the trailing edge of my KF, which is here. Everything forward here has the paper off, and I leave the paper on the back of the wing plate and the back plate here. These nacelles, vertical stabilizers, on this Elevon are made of Depron. So what that does present is some challenges. It tends to make the plane a bit more tail heavy. So what I do is, if I can, based on the structure of the plane, is I'll actually move the motor. I found I move the motor forward by probably about an inch for the most part, and that helps to take, you know, it shifts the motor, shifts some weight a bit further forward, and it helps to take this extra weight in the back end of the plane sort of out of the equation. If not, what ends up happening is, you know, I could end up with, you know, my battery really far forward in order to compensate for that, and then the plane is not quite as maneuverable because the moment of inertia is quite a bit longer. So anyway, up here, you know, fuselage, KF's front part of the wing plate, because you know it's all built up, doesn't require the paper on. So I take the paper off that, and then like I said, I leave the paper on in the back. All right, so removing paper from the foam. So 99% of the time, most times that you buy it, you can actually just peel the foam off by hand. You know, sort of just put my fingernail under, you know, at a corner like that, and then just very, very gently peel it off. So it will leave a bit of a rough surface, you know, from where the paper has been treated onto the foam. And what you'll notice sometimes is, after a while, is the foam will actually bow if you leave the paper on both sides. So I just peel it off both sides. So now you can see comparatively it's quite a bit more flexible. So it does help to leave the paper on for strength. So what do I use for, do I use anything special for, or no, let's continue with removing the paper. So, you know, I mentioned about 99% of the time the paper comes off really easily. You can just peel it off by hand. There are the odd times where, depending on, you know, the production run, how the foam went through the machine, the paper is a bit more difficult to come off. You'll start to peel it and then it'll tear, and it won't, you know, it just comes off really ragged. So what I've found is if it's really, really large areas, I use this, I just buy this compound actually pre-made from the dollar store. It's 50% alcohol, rubbing alcohol, 50% water. For really, really large areas, I just have this squirt bottle that I got at dollar store. Just, you know, give it a good spray. You'll note within about 30 seconds or so that the paper should just bubble up and come off. So if in areas where, you know, for example, I like to trim the paper for about the 1/4 of an inch off the trailing edges and leading edges so that I can sand those. So if that becomes a bit difficult, what I do is I just use one of these, I put a little bit of this alcohol like in a little cup, and I just use one of these brushes, and then I just brush on a little bit, let it soak in, and then peel that paper off. Sometimes it helps if you just go along with your thumb and sort of rub it. And then what I do, if I end up doing that, is I let that paper dry completely before I seal it up with any glue. Okay, so what do I use for reinforcements? I use pretty much the same reinforcements that I use in any of my other park jets. You know, if you watch my videos, I fly pretty aggressively, so I tend to use 4mm carbon rod for my wing plate. You know, it's heavier. It's about twice as heavy as 3mm carbon tube. But you know, I've yanked and banked these things, you know, full throttle, 360-degree turns on 4S, and I've never seen any kind of wing flex whatsoever. So that's worked out really well. Sometimes, depending on the design of the plane, for example, this F-15 version 5 that I just finished building, I made the vertical stabilizers out of Dollar Tree foam. So I left the paper on, except around the edges, you know, where I sanded. So what I did was I put just a little bit of bamboo skewer down here, and what I did was hopefully you can see, I didn't cut right through. I just trimmed the paper, or trimmed the foam down, took it out so the paper is still good on the one side, and then I just put that in there with epoxy. And the main reason that I do that is probably, you know, in a perfect world, if I never banged or bumped the plane, it would be fine. It would be strong enough with the paper left on. But you know, I do it 99% of the time. I do most of my dinging and gonking of my planes, getting them in and out of the car. So if, for example, you know, if it was an Elevon or like that vertical stabilizer, what I do, the reason that I put the bamboo skewer in is, let's say I give it a good gonk, and then that's what happens is you get a wrinkle like that in the paper, and then it's next to near impossible to get it perfectly straight again. So what I found is by putting that bamboo skewer in there, it just helps prevent you know, getting these situations where if I give it a good gonk, that I end up with a whole pile of wrinkles in it. So that's one of the reasons that, you know, on a vertical stabilizer or an Elevon, I will put a little bit of bamboo skewer. Seems to be just fine. Plus, it's super cheap. Again, get it at the dollar store, and it's very, very light. Okay, so I trim again. I trim trailing edges of the wing, leading edge here. I trim around the prop slot. I also trim, when I make my hinges, I know it's going to be hard for you to see, but I trim about a ½ inch off the paper on both the control surface and sort of the wing plate here, for example, with this aileron. The reason being is that, you know, having some good bare foam instead of putting it right on top of the paper, not only does it reduce weight, but I think it helps the tape to grip the bare foam a little better than it grips straight onto the paper. So what I do, for example, I did it with black here just because it's easier to see, is I will just draw whatever line, you know, area that I need. And this is where this little knife comes in really handy. I'll just do, just a rough cut here, is I just will go along very, very lightly, just enough to sort of go through the paper, and then just peel. You can see there that just peels right off. So what I do is when I trim these the paper off edges like that, and I've got an edge of paper, is what I do is I use a glue. This is called Craft Medley Premium Craft Glue. It's identical pretty much to Bob Smith Industries Foam Cure. I know it's very difficult to get. I'm pretty lucky I can actually get this at my Dollar Tree store as well. It's very, very inexpensive, and it dries like epoxy. So what I'll do is I'll go around, I'll spread a very, very thin bead of this glue along the edge of the paper, and then I'll take some foam and scrap foam, and then just really, really rub it, rub the excess off so it's got the thinnest layer possible. Now, one of the main reasons that I do this, and one of the main reasons that I waterproof my planes, is where I live on the wet coast of Canada. About 90% of the time when I go to the field, there's going to be moisture on the grass, either dew or rain from the day before, especially in the wintertime. So my planes are almost always going to get wet. And what this does is that by sealing the edges of this paper, it just helps any water being able to seep in under there and soaking the paper, which then makes it super heavy, and then will also cause the paper to come off. So it's a bit fussy. If I'm honest with you, it takes me about 50% longer to build a plane with Dollar Tree foam than it would with model plane foam or Depron, because of those little fussy things. But again, I think it allows my planes to be very high performance and also, pardon me, very very durable. Okay, so glues that again, with any foam, if you try it, you always want to try take a scrap and put all the glues and tapes and paints and whatever else that you plan on building with, and put it on some scrap foam and see if the foam reacts with it at all. So this is Craft Bond, Elmer's Craft Bond. This is what I use for putting my plans onto the foam, but it doesn't cause any issues with the foam if it gets on bare foam. It's never caused me any problems. Again, I build primarily with this. Most of my build is with this premium craft glue, which is like Bob Smith Industries Foam Cure. It takes a little bit longer to dry, but it dries like epoxy. It's sandable, and it's super lightweight. So this is good. It doesn't eat the foam. I do use some hot glue now and then to to sort of spot weld pieces together. This is a low temperature glue gun, but when I take the paper off the foam, I do find that the Dollar Tree foam will probably melt maybe a little quicker than, say, MPF or Depron. So I don't let the tip linger there for too long, otherwise I could end up melting the foam. This is an Elmer's spray adhesive. It's very, very similar to 3M Super 77. I use this to put my KFs on, so it's bare Dollar Tree foam to bare Dollar Tree foam. This has worked just fine. It doesn't eat the foam. Dries good and strong. And again, like I said, it's exactly works just as well as 3M Super 77, which I've also used to put my KFs on. This is Gorilla expanding glue. Actually, good old 5-minute epoxy. I just get this at the dollar store. This is what I use if I do need to cut. In the initial layout, if I've had to cut pieces of plans, let's say I have the wing plate up and then glue them back together in order to assemble the plane, this is what I like to use to butt those pieces together, is epoxy, because it dries quickly, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're ready to go, and it also dries super strong. I use this to put in all of my reinforcement, my motor mount, and my control horns. So good old 5-minute epoxy, no problems with the glue there. One of the things, because I remove the foam here on the inside here to try and save some weight, is I take the paper, the paper's off here. So there's not a lot of room between the back of the motor mount here and where this control rod is. So what happens is you've got a very thin piece of foam there, and it can cause some flex. So what I use, like in this one, for example, it almost looks like somebody blobbed my plane there in the behind the motor mount. But this is foaming Gorilla Glue, so it foams up to about 10 times what you apply, but it dries super hard and strong. This one I even put a couple of little pieces of popsicle stick in, so this motor mount is like super secure. So I do that with all my planes now. After it's all good to go, I just put in the electronics bay, and on the bottom you can see I really kind of went a little bit nuts here, along where the motor mount meets the foam and where the rod is through the foam. I will put that Gorilla Glue, and touch wood, haven't had any issues there whatsoever. That's been super strong. Okay, so finishing. I still sand my planes. The one thing about Dollar Tree foam, it sands really easily. In fact, you have to be very careful with it, because you can gouge it really easily. With the paper off, it's softer than Depron and model plane foam, so it can gouge a little bit, but it's very easy to sand. But again, you do have to be careful, because if you're sitting there watching a hockey game or something sanding and you forget, you could end up sanding a hole right through your plane. I just use probably like 150, some 150, maybe 220 if I want a really smooth finish, but mostly just 150. Okay, to waterproof my plane, I learned this from a video, and again, I think in one of my blog posts I mentioned earlier in the video, I have the original video that Flight Test did. This is oil-based Minwax polyurethane, and I've always used the oil-based because I've heard that if you use the water-based, it will actually cause the paper to lift off of the foam, but the oil-based works really well. So what I do with my planes, so let's say for example this F-15, I actually did this one in 2 stages. You can see it's kind of dirty, but so far the paper is held up really well. Now this urethane, all this polyurethane does is it seals the paper. It does not glue the paper onto the foam. So like when I've crashed a plane, or if I've recycled a plane, the paper still comes off really easily. So it doesn't necessarily soak all the way through. It doesn't glue the paper onto the foam. So on this one, I actually did it in 2 stages, because I wanted to put my so I did the bottom part first. I like to do it outside because this stuff smells pretty strong. I just do it outside and then leave the plane in my garden shed overnight to let most of the fumes off gas before I bring it into the house. The reason I did that was, I wanted to do all of have the plane flipped upside down, do all my servos and linkages and stuff on the bottom, and then when I was ready to paint the top, then I glued my vertical stabilizers on, and then I did the top part. One thing about this is, because it has oil in it, if you try and glue over top of it, your glue joint may or may not hold very well. So I always try and have all my stuff glued wherever this stuff is going to come in contact, glued, and then I use it to treat the paper. And so far, touch wood. I use this transparent duct tape for my hinges. So if you use a different product, I would maybe test this with your whatever you use for your hinges, to make sure that if you put that urethane over top of your hinges, that it doesn't eat the glue or eat the adhesive on your tape or whatever it is you use. Alright, so lesson that I've learned here, I got a bit lazy, even though it says don't shake, stir, a few times I just shook it. I didn't, I was too lazy. I forgot to bring out a popsicle stick or something to stir it with. And what happens is the resin that helps make the seal, it was sinking to the bottom, and shaking it was not getting it off the bottom. So this, I don't know if you can see it, but this T50 in the back here, I was sort of towards the end of the last can that I used, and I was getting to the point where what I was brushing onto the plane didn't have much of the resin left. And I've had a couple spots now on that plane where the paper's actually bubbled off the foam. So that's pretty much a dry weather plane only. So anyway, again, I take it outside, just give it a good stir with like a popsicle stick, tongue depressor, whatever, and get all that resin stirred up. I just use, because I don't have a lot of want to be messing around with a lot of paint thinners, turpentine to clean my brushes, I just use one of these foam brushes I get at the dollar store, and then I throw it in the garbage. I know that's probably not environmentally conscious, but neither is spilling a bunch of Varsol and stuff all over the place either, I suppose. So anyway, what I do is I'll brush it on, you know, and be very careful not to brush it on too heavy. Just spread a nice even coat over the paper. Make sure that there's no big drips or anything, because those will dry pretty hard and then also add weight. So I probably leave the polyurethane on the paper for, I don't know, maybe 90 seconds to about 2 minutes. And then what I do is I just take paper towel and I give it a good wipe with paper towel, you know, wiping off in all the grooves and stuff like that, and make sure there's no excess polyurethane left, and just give it a nice wipe. And you'll be able to see after you wipe off the excess, this is like a clear satin finish, and it'll just have a clear, you know, a nice clear satin finish. And then again, I just let it sit overnight outside in my garden shed, so that it doesn't smell really strong if I did it in the house, because it does smell quite strong. Okay, for painting, I use primarily you know, just these water-based acrylic craft paints. So it doesn't necessarily do the best job compared to Depron or model plane foam or whatever. As you can see on this F15 here, you know, there's a few areas where the paint didn't quite go on as nicely maybe as I would have wanted. It looks a little rough, but it's, you know, it's smooth, but it looks a little rough, like from a quality standpoint. But anyway, you know, when my plane's up in the air ripping by at 70 miles or 80 miles an hour, I'm not really too worried about that. But anyway, just be conscious of that. One of the reasons that it probably does that is that I tend to thin my paints down a little bit to save weight. So what I do with my paints is I'll put them in a little cup, and then I dilute them with this alcohol water mix, just because the alcohol evaporates off faster than the water. So it thins the paint down a little bit, but it saves weight. So again, because I've put the Minwax on there to repel water, it probably repels the paint a little bit too. So just be aware of that. This old beater here, I just did this in magic marker actually, but you know, it worked out just fine. And you know, when I'm ripping around in the air, it's not too much of a problem. You can see now that maybe over time the Minwax has started to yellow a little bit, or that might have just been because it's picked up a lot of dirt and water over time. But anyway, touch wood, it hasn't, you know, because I took the time to seal all these edges with glue and then you know, do the Minwax treatment. So far the paper hasn't lifted off, and this plane still flies absolutely awesome even after close to 320 flights. Okay, so I think that's about it, folks. I know there was a lot of detail there, and maybe you know, a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily need to do depending on what you want out of your planes. You know, it's certainly, you know, I've learned that I can build a really good high performance park jet that's, you know, can be fast, take a lot of punishment aerobatically, and you know, hold up over a long time using very inexpensive Dollar Tree foam. It is allowing me to extend for a lot longer my supply of model plane foam and Depron, and I can still build some really good planes. So if you are going to build purely out of Dollar Tree foam, what I did, I built a MiG-35 completely out of Dollar Tree foam. So what I did on the bottom here is I took the paper off of the nacelles to save weight. So they did end up being a little bit flimsy. So what I ended up doing, because the bottoms of them cracked pretty quickly after maybe about a dozen flights. So what I ended up doing was I put just like a tongue depressor, which is you know, really thin, wide piece of wood, and I just epoxied that along the bottom, and that really seemed to help. It, you know, added a few grams of weight, but it made it nice and strong. So that's something you can do there. But just, you know, just be aware that if your nacelles, if you leave the paper on, your plane's probably going to be getting on the chunky side, a bit too heavy on those nacelles. But if you take the paper off, you know, you can figure out ways to reinforce it without adding a whole lot of extra weight. So yeah, so again, you know, I know some of these techniques are a lot more advanced maybe than you want to do or you need to do. I have to do all the waterproofing, otherwise my planes would last about half a dozen flights, and then the paper would be peeling off of them and they'd just be an absolute mess. But yeah, I've been super impressed with working with Dollar Tree foam. Again, it's cheap. You know, even though this polyurethane costs about $10 a can, if I'm careful, the first tin I think I got about 12 planes out of, so that adds about $1 to the price, but it's still cheaper in the long run, and the planes have flown and lasted really well. So again, a big shout out to my friend Peter, Homie666 on RC Powers, Flight Test, and all the other folks who have shared over time their experiences with Dollar Tree foam. I hope that you found this helpful. I know that Dollar Tree foam is not available you know, globally, but you know, if you can find something similar, you can build some pretty high performance durable park jets with a little bit of extra patience and time. So please check the comments down below again for those blog post threads or blog posts that, you know, of the lessons I learned very early on when I started using Dollar Tree foam. Thanks again for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.